This man you see on top of the tower is going to die. But before he dies, he will do something that no soldier should ever have to do in the middle of a war. He will try to find a Wi-Fi signal to connect to the internet. And this didn't happen just once. Other Russian soldiers are trying to do the same. They are desperate. Meanwhile, Ukraine was on the other side, watching and taking advantage of every second of this blindness to make one of the smartest moves of this war. To understand what happened, you need to understand the importance of communication, because it is everything in a war like this. Without it, you don't know where the enemy is, you can't guide drones, you can't coordinate an attack, you can't even call for reinforcements. It's like trying to play chess in the dark. And at this point, Ukraine had a clear advantage. Starlink, the satellite internet service created by the company SpaceX, owned by businessman Elon Musk. Instead of relying on cables or transmission towers that can be destroyed, it works through thousands of small satellites that orbit the Earth at high speed, very close to the surface. The result is fast, stable internet that's extremely hard to take down. For Ukraine, it was a revolution. Ukrainian soldiers could communicate in real time, even in the middle of nowhere. Drones were piloted with surgical precision. Attacks were coordinated with an efficiency that few armies in the world could match. But then this happened, something no one expected. The Russian forces realized what Starlink was doing for the enemy and decided they wanted the same thing. But there was a problem. SpaceX didn't sell to Russia, and Starlink's terms of use explicitly prohibited the use of the terminals in offensive operations. And Russia was on the wrong side of this war by any criteria you use. But that didn't stop the Russians. What started to happen from 2023 onwards was a quiet and systematic smuggling scheme. Starlink terminals started entering Russia through clandestine routes, passing through Central Asia and the Persian Gulf. They ended up in the hands of Russian military units, who paid whatever price was necessary to get access to this signal. And it worked. Russia believed it could use the enemy's technology without consequences, that it could rely on an American service to wage a war against the West, that no one would notice, or that if they did, they wouldn't do anything. That was the first mistake, and also the most costly one. For months, Russian troops on the front line used smuggled Starlink terminals to coordinate attacks, guide drones, and keep the chain of command functioning. Terminals were found mounted on armored vehicles, on drones, and in improvised command posts. Ukraine knew about this. Ukrainian authorities had been warning for months that enemy troops were, in their words, quietly using Starlink to operate. But then comes the question, knowing this, what could the Ukrainians do? This is where the story takes a turn. At some point at the end of 2025, SpaceX and the Ukrainian government reached an agreement. SpaceX would implement a whitelist system, a kind of permission list. The idea is simple. Only the terminals that were registered and approved for Ukrainian use would continue working. Everything else would be automatically blocked. It was a technical decision, a line of code on some servers somewhere in California, but the effect on the battlefield was catastrophic for Russia. On February 1st, 2026, SpaceX activated this system, and the Russian screens went dark. Not slowly, not gradually, but all of a sudden, about 90% of the Russian units on the front line lost the connectivity they had been using to operate. And at that moment, the question arose that no one knew how to answer. How long would it take Russia to recover, and what would Ukraine do with that time? Imagine what that means in practice. A soldier who is guiding a drone through a Starlink terminal suddenly loses signal. The drone goes out of control and the attack is aborted. An officer who was coordinating an advance over encrypted satellite radio is suddenly talking to no one. Nobody responds. The chain of command breaks down. An entire unit that depended on real-time communication to advance in a synchronized way suddenly is in the dark, not knowing what the other units are doing, unable to coordinate, unable to react. The advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Serhiy Bezkresnov, followed what happened in real time. And he used a specific word to describe the enemy's situation, and the word is catastrophe. In his words, the enemy on the front line is facing not just a problem, but a catastrophe. All command and control of the troops collapsed, and assault operations were paralyzed in many areas. But perhaps the most surprising confirmation did not come from a Ukrainian official, it came from the Russian side. Boris Rozin is a pro-Kremlin military blogger, meaning someone who supports the Russian government and usually downplays any problems faced by Russian forces. Even he did not hide what was happening. In a public post, Rozin wrote, "Yes, there are no alternatives now. Stop and think. When someone on the Russian side admits this publicly, you know the situation is serious. Now you must be wondering, but didn't Russia have a plan B? Yes, it did, but Plan B was much worse than Plan A. Russia tried to replace Starlink with its own satellite constellations. The Yamal and Express systems, operated by the company Gazprom Space Systems, had been suggested as alternatives, but there is a fundamental technical difference between these systems and Starlink, and it's worth understanding why. This is where it becomes clear why Russia was in a trap it couldn't get out of. Think about it. Starlink uses thousands of satellites in low orbit, really close to Earth, fast and stable connection. It's like having an internet antenna right above your head. The Russian satellites are in geostationary orbit, much farther away. This creates a delay in communication, which technicians call high latency. In practice, it's like sending a message that takes 2 seconds to arrive instead of a fraction of a second. 2 seconds might seem like a short time, but on the battlefield, that's an eternity. Ukrainian military intelligence, known by the acronym DIU, intercepted conversations of Russian soldiers complaining about exactly that. The Gazprom terminals were so bad that the soldiers themselves described using them in combat as practically impossible due to the poor quality of the connection. And there's more. The Russian satellite system has only 5 geostationary satellites covering the region, just 5. Think about what that means. 5 satellites to cover a front line of hundreds of kilometers with tens of thousands of soldiers all needing signal at the same time is like trying to supply an entire city with a garden hose. The DIU was straightforward in its assessment. That number is insufficient to cover the entire front line, and the existing capacity is mainly used to serve civilian subscribers within Russia itself. To make matters worse, the operator has been under international sanctions since February 2024, which complicates any attempt to upgrade or expand the system. Russia has also started testing a communication platform using stratospheric balloons called Barrage 1, and it had an ambitious plan to launch its own constellation of 300 satellites. But the first launch, which was expected for the end of 2025, was postponed to 2026. In other words, without Starlink, without a viable alternative, and with no prospect of a quick solution. Lieutenant Denis Yaroslavsky, commander of a special reconnaissance unit of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, was precise in his assessment. Even if Russia manages to implement an alternative, it will take at least 4 to 6 months for it to work on a large scale. 4 to 6 months without effective communication on the battlefield, and Ukraine was not waiting. It watched the Russian army fall and made a decision that changed the course of the war. The numbers on the battlefield began to tell a very clear story in the days following the blockade. Before the Starlink cutoff, regular Russian units operated with a casualty rate of 5 to 1. That means that for every Ukrainian soldier taken out of action, 5 Russian soldiers were neutralized. It was already a bad ratio for Russia, but it was tolerable. With Starlink cut off, that ratio jumped to 13 to 1. 13 Russian soldiers for every Ukrainian. And the Russian drone unit called Rubicon, which used Starlink to extend the range of its attack drones and coordinate deep offensives into Ukrainian territory, simply stopped operating. More than that, the group usually posted details of their attacks on Telegram, a kind of digital war diary. After the blockade, they completely stopped posting. The Institute for the Study of War, one of the most respected military analysis organizations in the world, confirmed that SpaceX's decision was negatively impacting Rubicon's attack operations. But the casualty numbers are only part of the story. What happened on the map was even more dramatic. Between February 11th and 15th, 2026, Ukrainian forces recaptured 201 square kilometers of territory. To give you an idea of what that means, this area is equivalent to everything Russia had captured in the entire month of December 2025. Recaptured in 5 days what took the enemy a month to take. The Institute for the Study of War's analysis was straightforward. The Ukrainian counterattacks likely took advantage of the recent blocking of Russian access to Starlink, which Russian military bloggers claim is causing communication and command problems along the entire front line. On February 5th, 4 days after the blockade, daily Russian attacks dropped from a range of 80 to 110 per day to 56. Almost half. Without effective communication, without the ability to coordinate offensives, without a way to guide drones accurately, the Russians retreated and Ukraine advanced. But here we come to the next part of the story, which most people still don't know. Imagine you're a Russian soldier on the front line. Your Starlink terminal has gone dark. You can't communicate. You can't guide your drone. You can't know what's happening with the other soldiers around you. You're desperate. Then on some Telegram channel, you see a message, a service that claims it can register your terminal on the Ukrainian whitelist, that it can make your Starlink work again, that for a small payment can reconnect you. What do? Many Russian soldiers paid, and that's exactly when they fell into a trap that Ukraine had carefully prepared. The 156th Ukraine's Cyber Assault Division, working together with open-source intelligence groups, created this fake Starlink registration service. They set up a network of channels and bots on Telegram, made it look legitimate, even created a fake public controversy around one of the channels to give credibility to the operation, and waited. Russian soldiers started to show up. To register the terminal, they needed to provide some information: the terminal identification number, the satellite dish number, the Starlink account number, and the location coordinates, latitude and longitude. They provided everything. At the end of the operation, Ukraine had collected 1,420 entries with precise data on Russian Starlink terminals and their locations on the battlefield. And they collected $1,870 from the Russian soldiers themselves for the fake service. The operation was named Operation Self-Liquidation. The group militant, one of the partners in the operation, summed up the result with a phrase that leaves no doubt about what happened with the collected coordinates. As for the coordinates they sent, packages were sent back, and do you know what those packages actually were? 155mm artillery shells, the same ones supplied to Ukraine by allied countries. In other words, the Russian soldiers, in desperation, sent their own location and got heavy fire in return. It's hard to find a more complete picture of what happened during those weeks. On one side, an army that built part of its combat capability on technology that wasn't theirs, that they didn't control, and that depended on a private American company to keep working. On the other side, a smaller country with fewer resources that studied this dependency. They waited for the right moment and then turned every weakness of the enemy into an opportunity. The Starlink shutdown wasn't just technical, it was strategic, and Ukraine was ready to take advantage of every second. The Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov told European partners that Ukraine had managed to inflict more casualties on the enemy than the Kremlin was able to recruit in the previous 2 months, more casualties than they could replace. Despite the numbers, there's something in this story that goes beyond the war itself. For the first time in such a clear and documented way, a private technology created by a commercial company, operated by a single businessman, has become one of the most decisive factors in a conflict between nations. Governments around the world have started asking the same question out loud. What happens when the most critical infrastructure in a war is in the hands of a single billionaire? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. But what the story from February 2026 showed is that this question is no longer hypothetical, it's already real. And Ukraine knew how to use this reality better than anyone expected. That man on top of the tower climbed up knowing he could die. He climbed up because he was desperate. He climbed up because the army he was part of had built its war on a foundation it didn't control. And when the Kremlin had to choose between protecting its soldiers or admitting it had made a monumental strategic mistake, the choice was clear. The soldiers were left in the dark, literally. And in 15 days, Ukraine regained the equivalent of an entire month of Russian advances. Not with more tanks, not with more soldiers, with a whitelist on a server in California and thousands of coordinates voluntarily handed over by the enemy for $5 each. Now I want to know what you think. If you were a military leader today, would you trust your wartime communications to a private company? Or is that too risky? Leave your answer in the comments. If this video made you think, share it with someone, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to do it now. See you in the next video.